This story tells the history of the painful era of horses. Horses who kept working in difficulties by hiding their pain. The story begins with coal. Yes, mankind has had a long love affair with coal. Coal is a fossil fuel that began to form in the Carboniferous period during the Paleozoic era, 359 million to 299 million years ago. People in England were using coal for fuel long before the Roman invasion. In the 13th century, coal seams were found along the coastlines of northern England, and settlers dug them up and then carried them inland under rocks or hills, which was the early beginning of drift mining. But with the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, coal mining exploded, providing fuel for steam engines, transportation, and home heating. In the early years, men, women, and children worked in the mines until laws were made to protect women. As productivity improved and underground haulage needs grew, horses and ponies met the need. Horses were used extensively after the Mines Act of 1842, which ended the underground employment of boys under 10 and all women. In the 1870s, there were an estimated 200,000 pit ponies in Great Britain. These animals had a very hard life, with many working up to 16 hours a day, often without food or water. Some animals never saw the light of day. There were widespread reports of abuse, injury, and disease. But working horses in the mines was extremely difficult for the horses. Their heads were scratched, and they were forced to work long hours in the dark. Miners reported that the tops of their heads would rub against the ceiling, leaving flesh hanging off them and bones exposed. In fact, in low tunnels, they would be trapped by their shoulders. Often injuries in the dirty air would become infected and require veterinary treatment, or more drastic treatment, such as using kerosene from a syringe, which would soak up the pus and secretions. Sometimes the horse would get a bacterial infection, which would lead to tetanus. Horses used in the mines were either allowed to recover from illness or injury, or were killed in the event of a catastrophic injury, such as a broken leg. Any horse that was unwanted or unsuitable was sold to local residents, who were always a willing market. It was tiring, dirty work. Several dozen horses were used in one mine, and underground roads had to be kept clear of pit water, which was acidic and salty in Cape Breton's submarine mines. Standing water not only hindered the movement of the coal tubs, but also caused cuts on the soles of the horses' feet, leading to inflammation and infection. Ponies were also used extensively in mines alongside horses. These often worked in small lode mines. Nova Scotia was the leading region of the coal industry in Canada, and the earliest coal mines in the late 1700s were on Cape Breton Island and in Pictou, Nova Scotia. On Vancouver Island, coal was mined systematically from the mid-1800s. After the arrival of the railroad in the late 1800s, coal was mined in the interior of British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. Coal is not found in Ontario or Quebec, regions that became Canada's industrial heartland. The width of the coal seams varied considerably in different areas of the country. Large ponies or horses worked the thicker coal seams, smaller ponies worked the shallower seams. Horses and ponies were often lowered into the mine by lifts. Horses initially pulled skips, sledge-like vehicles drawn over roads made of wooden logs. Gradually, the skips were replaced by wooden coal tubs bolted to an iron frame and fitted with a wheeled undercarriage that ran on rails. By 1871, many miles of underground railway had been built on the East Coast. Driving a horse through the underground tunnels required both skill and strength. This was often a second job underground for teenage boys, considered a learning experience, introducing young miners to the varied environment of the mine. Seated between the horse and the tub or tubs being pulled, often placing his foot on the horse's back to stop the tub, a drover would lead the horse along dark, underground traveling roads, collecting tubs full of freshly cut coal and taking them to a place where they could be brought to the surface. He then had to return the empty tubs to the working sites. The role of the drover was vital to efficient mining. As the miner's earnings depended on his productivity, the efficient movement of coal to the surface for processing was essential. Empty boxes had to be ready when he was ready to load coal, and the coal had to be transported to the bottom of the mine with a minimum of delay and loss. Ponies were treated with greater care in mines than horses, because operators understood that their efficiency was directly related to the health of their animals. There was further incentive given the cost and time involved in buying and training replacements for injured or sick ponies. Many miners lamented that management was more concerned about the care and safety of ponies than men. because you could remove a worker at any time, but not your working animal. Some mines had underground stables where horses and ponies were kept for most of the year. They were brought to the surface and turned out to pasture when work slowed. A stableman was in charge of the underground stables and was responsible for making sure the animals had a good supply of feed and water. In Alberta, in the late 1800s, coal mines employed ponies, mules, and horses. One mine might have up to 80 ponies, capable of pulling 5 fully loaded coal trains. Like miners elsewhere, Alberta coal miners developed an endearing relationship with their animals, often boasting about how smart they were, or how strong, or how heroic. Working with the same animal, a miner formed a bond with his pony, and each got to know each other and how they worked together. Ponies could count. While working, ponies would pull drums or tubs of coal. These tubs were on little rails like railroad cars. Ponies could really count. I have been told this hundreds of times by former miners. They would hear the click as each tub was added. 3 was acceptable, 4 was not. The pony would not move until the 4th was removed. Many times ponies saved lives. Ponies would often stay in place, refusing to move as there was a risk of the roof collapsing ahead. In this way, the ponies saved many miners' lives. Pit ponies and horses developed unique skills. They learned to move around in small spaces, respond to verbal commands, and open ventilation doors. They worked in total darkness, but knew their way around. Many horses in Nova Scotia mines went underground and remained there year after year. But this changed in the 1940s when miners started getting holidays and horses were brought in for their own holidays and let out in a big field. Apparently, they loved it and would gallop kicking and galloping across the field. Their vision needed to adjust to the brightness of daylight, and they would usually pass the pits they passed by as obstacles. There are not a single pony or horse working in British mines today. The last deep mine pony came out of the Ellington Colliery in 1994. The last 2 horses came out of the Wells Drift mines in 1999. The era of the pit pony is far from over. Today, in the Chakwal district of Pakistan, thousands of donkeys still work in coal mines, where they work the coal seams inside the Salt Range Mountains. Instead of being tied to coal carts, donkeys carry heavy sacks of coal through narrow tunnels. It's hard, dangerous work,